Big day, Jennifer. We have a very special guest.
I'm still hungover from Fated Mates Live. I'm sorry. Is that?
I know. Oh, yeah. Fated Mates Live was on Friday. Very exciting. But also on Tuesday, yesterday, for everybody listening on the day this drops. And why wouldn't you be listening on the day this drops? Why isn't this the first thing you do on Wednesday mornings? A new book was released by my friend and one of my favorite authors, Sophie Jordan, called The Scandalous Ladies of London, or that's the series title. And the book is called The Countess. And we are very lucky to have Sophie with us today. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, I feel so lucky. Thank you.
Sophie is a long-standing friend of the pod.
Yeah, and I was like, I keep thinking we should count how many times, but I'll have to do that later. Like at least a couple of times,
wait a
right?
second. Are we there? Are we at 5? Are you a 5-timer?
Oh my gosh, I have to be close. I feel like maybe I'm 4.
It could be 4.
I feel like maybe I'm not 5.
Well, because when you're a 5-timer, you get you're in a club. You learn a special handshake. We have a special code.
That's exciting.
We have a private club in New York City that you can attend. No.
All those
Some
things.
dark under dungeon.
Yes.
Exactly.
A speakeasy, maybe. Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone, to Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels, and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor, and we're with Sophie today. So, Sophie, we are dying to hear about The Countess.
The Countess. It's a book 1 in a series. I kind of had this idea of making something really fun and modern in Regency, and I do watch a lot of reality television. And I think the Real Housewives show is great and so much drama.
Do you guys have I told everybody that on the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, I taught, like, there's a kid whose mom is one of the housewives, and I taught him before he moved there. So it's like kind of funny to be like, oh yeah.
So you are sort of related.
Yeah, obviously. That's exactly what it is. I'm sure he thinks of me fondly often.
Listen,
you're a relative.
That Real Housewives, like, whole world. I remember when the first one came out, back in the day, I was like, no way does this become, like, who wants to watch this? And now we're all...
How many seasons and cities later
200 seasons in. So Sophie, you came up with this idea that you wanted to write basically like The Scandalous Ladies of London, right? Which was
exactly
Regency-era Real Housewives.
Right. Exactly. This group of women, not necessarily debutantes, but like, experienced women, some of them married, some of them widowed, some of them not married yet, or, there may be one young girl in the group, but they're kind of all walks of life. And I kind of feel like, well, that's how I am in my life with my friend group.
Mm-hmm.
I had cocktails recently with 4 of us, and I felt like the youngest woman in our group was like 35, and there was someone who was 55. And then the 35-year-old just like announced she was pregnant. And I was like, how is this possible? I have a friend who's having a baby, It's wild. Like, but we all come together and have these shared experiences. And I just wanted to create, that kind of, really a girl gang that feels, I don't know how I would be in my life without my women friends, like my girls, my people that I have surviving, in my writing world, in my professional world. I have them in my, here local in my neighborhood, my mom friends, It's how I get through.
I mean, it does feel like there was something in the water and maybe it wasn't in the water. Maybe it was the pandemic altogether.
I was going to say, was it the pandemic water?
It was the COVID water. And if we all just sort of, I feel like across romance, a lot of the series, across the world, so many of us reconnected with friends. I remember right at the very beginning of the pandemic, like having Saturday night movie nights with people I would never see weekly, but like they were people all across the country. We were all locked in our house and like trying to find community however we could find it. I started writing a girl gang series at the beginning of the pandemic. You started writing a girl gang series at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't think we're alone. I think there are a lot of us who are doing similar things. And, Yeah, it is that sort of search for community during a time when we were all stuck at home staring at, ourselves and maybe, the one or, two people who we live with.
Right, right. Well, and it was interesting because I went back and we had okay, you were going to laugh. It was March 4th of 2020 was when we had our episode that was like women's friendship and romance.
Oh my God, it was right
the
before.
week, literally the week before
Sweet, naive baby.
everything shut down, right? And it's funny because, so I was like, I sent Sarah the link and was kind of like, okay, here's what we talked about last time. And I have to tell you, I mean, some of those books are still my comfort reads, but I have a whole new list of comfort reads that essentially like came out during the pandemic.
Yep.
And I'm fascinated. I mean, I looked at that date and was like, holy moly. Like, because these books, even though almost every book I'm going to talk about like was not on that list at that time, like these books have become like literal comfort reads for me, where I looked at this list and I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about new things today necessarily. Every book I talk about today is a book that I like needed during the pandemic. You know what I mean? And so it was really interesting to be like, oh my gosh, like we were really a little bit of foreshadowing there, I guess, right?
Yeah. So, Sophie, but this isn't just a pandemic thing for you. You have written a number of romance series that are connected by heroines.
Before I came on, I kind of was looking at my bookshelf. I'm like, do I ever write a series that are connected by men or the heroes? And I don't think
Devil's
I do,
Rocks,
guys.
maybe Devil's Rock, I would say.
I don't know. It's like it was very like revealing to me. I was like, oh my gosh, like I identify through these women, and sometimes they're relatives and sisters, and sometimes they're not. The Penwick School for Virtuous Girls, my debutante files. Like, I think I started it was Rogue Files. And then I was like, it's the debutante files. Like, there's just more connection and affinity I have creating these bonds between women. If it's just familiar to me, it feels very real to me. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's my roots in Golden Girls. I don't know, guys. I mean, they are the OG, right?
They were,
like,
sure. Yes, I agree.
Reruns of the Golden Girls as I write, like, because I've seen each one 1,000 times. I could nail some Golden Girls trivia. But I mean, it's just, that's comfort to me, is have them playing in the background, like women of a certain age that are still living and, living life, finding romance, finding love, they have careers, they have interests, and they have each other through everything.
That's really interesting. Yeah. When I think about some of my favorite movies, like, you know what I mean? Or like TV shows, right. I think that's like a common thread. Like when I think about Buffy, like to me, it's like Buffy and Willow, right? Or, like Girls Trip, that movie that is so funny. I mean, right? Like, so I think that there are things that I really am drawn to for that. And I think one of the things that's also really interesting is like how there's, it's funny because I often say to people, everyone who's heard me say this before, I'm sorry, which is kind of like when people are like, why do you love romance? I often say it's because every time I read a romance where a woman is the main character, she's like a fully formed character. Her life, her values, what she cares about, what she wants, that is all important and treated seriously. Nothing about a woman's life is like a throwaway in a book, right? In a romance novel. And so, like the full kind of range of like women's friendships, like not even, I mean, with each other, with their mothers, with their cousins, with their grandmothers, right? Like this is a world where like women are so like richly developed. And I think that's, and so, when I think about my favorite books, it's like a lot of them have that, like, I mean, and this is a big change from the early days of romance, right? Where it was like the woman alone.
And that's really interesting because I've obviously known Sophie for a long time, and I know that so many of your favorite old school romances are these like Garwoods, Lindsays, Devereaux, where like the characters, it was a woman on an island.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And she had
That's true.
to develop her own community over the course of the book. But in so many of, like, I know Sophie loves an old medieval, same as I do. But part of the joy of those old medievals is the character arrives alone, right?
Yes.
And then builds a family for herself. Like, it's that,
Sure.
the
repayment for the Lady Kincaid, right?
Exactly, right?
Right. No, and that makes me think, I mean, I was a sucker for that Song trilogy by Catherine Coulter, medieval, three books, heroine driven. And they were, I mean, I feel like in any novel, romance, we're writing an underdog story. So that feels so real in a historical setting. Of course, the woman's going to be the underdog, she's not a man.
And she's the one who gets
time and an error
plucked out of her world and set down in something else.
Right. I mean, these are female-centric stories. They have the greatest conflicts, the greatest challenges. That's who I empathize with. That's who I want to focus on.
Yeah. One of the other things I guess I would say too is, like, at least when I wonder if like young women still feel this way, right? But like I remember in like my teens and 20s, this like feeling of that there were some friends you had that when they fell in love or like started a romantic relationship, that their friendships, right, became like secondary, right?
For sure. Right? We all know those.
We all know those people. And I think the other thing that I really think is interesting about these books, about thinking about like female friendship in romance, is like watching and seeing how women like navigate, right? Like keeping those close friendships even as they are like bringing someone new into their lives, right?
Right. I think about that. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and I think about that as she's entering into a relationship. I listen. That's what we do as parents anyway, right? We listen more at that age, and I'm listening, and I'm like, is she still talking to that girl, that one that she was besties with, and like, I want that. I want that for her so badly, because I know how, I hate to say, in the beginning, it's all sunshine and rainbows and like, but in a year, you need these women in your life. You need them.
And like navigating and like figuring out how to do that, I think is
how to have both.
Yeah. Right.
Well, also, I mean, one of my very favorite tropes, and I think it's born of reality among, with women in friendship, is I love it when somebody finds a hero, right? A heroine finds a hero, say, and then the rest of the friend group is like, now let's test him. Like, is he worthy of
Love it.
Right? And I mean, I've certainly been doing, I find myself doing that in every Hell Spells book. Like, is this person worth, like, does he join? Because he, of course, will become part of the whole group, right? I find often that, so I'm writing this Girl Gang series, and I find often that, now I'm writing the third book in the series. And there were a couple of moments as I was writing this book where I was like, there are way too many people in this scene. And it's because now there are these two dudes who are sort of honorary bells because they married in, right?
Right.
And so they're in the group now.
Right.
So, I had to send them away to get, actual
It's tricky because you're writing a book that already has a lot of girls.
Right.
You're writing a book that already has multiple female,
exactly.
There's these heroines, and you have heroines of future books, and you're like, and now we're adding their men in the mix, and there's like 13 people.
Like, too many people in this room.
Right.
But the point is that it's that joy of like, which was a joy that I think it's the same DNA as the joy that I have, when I read like a best friend's brother story. No, a brother's best friend story where the brother is like, you better not hurt my sister, right?
Right.
This is, you better not hurt my friend. And there is that sort of powerful moment in these books where, women are able to play that role. And that's one of my favorite moments.
what I in the Countess, they're part of a group. They're within this group, but certain women in the group would never say they're best friends or even like another woman. But they're in the group because they have this mutual shared friend. And I felt like that was very authentic.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think we've all known that, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I know you're looking across the table and you're like, we're not each other's people, but we have a shared bestie.
Right.
So that's what kind of happens also in the Countess that I think that was interesting and fun to navigate. At no time did I want to have portray women hating on other women, but it felt very authentic that maybe they're just not each other's people. And then to get, without spoiling, to a point where I want them to act in a way that they are each other's allies at the end of the day. At the end of the day, they will come together.
Right.
That's kind of my goal.
Before we get into recommendations, and I know we all have recommendations for series that do this really well, I wonder if let's talk a little bit more about the Countess, because I think what's really fascinating and something that you come back to over and over again in your books, Sophie, is this is a character. Well, first of all, nobody writes a woman against the wall, a heroine against the wall like you do. And the fascinating thing about the Countess is that the main character of the Countess, the heroine of the Countess, is married at the beginning of the book. And she does not
has to be a countess, right?
She does not fall in love with her husband. So
no.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like tackling that, because this is the first time you've done that, right?
Definitely.
You did the book I refer to as Bride Overboard.
Me too.
Which I can never remember the title of, because in the first chapter she is married and she is literally tossed overboard by her terrible husband. But that's a different situation. This character is married for a while to a terrible man.
He is, but I felt like that is so authentic to the era where today you read a contemporary and the heroine's married and she has an affair, and I think we're much more. We're just not as sympathetic to that because we're like, get a divorce, get out of it. What are you doing? But that was not an option, or it just wasn't an easy thing.
No, you need an act of parliament to get a divorce.
Exactly. Thank you. And she didn't necessarily have as much autonomy in marrying him in the beginning, right? So, shy of being an outright arranged marriage, it was essentially, these are arranged marriages. They get into this relationship, and it is not healthy in any way. So it's funny, though. There's still readers who are a little like, oh, but I don't like it. I'm like, well, if you're going to look at it through a lens of 2023, I get why you don't like it, but it feels very real. Why this woman who is in a marriage really not of her own making, in a situation not of her own making, and she still doesn't go out looking for love. She's not trying to fall in love with someone else. And she doesn't want to step outside her marriage. In fact, I think I have it where she's like, that's what he does. I don't want to be anything like him. She doesn't look for this, and she certainly doesn't look for it. The hero is a suitor of her daughter's, someone her husband has handpicked for her daughter. So there's a lot.
Who the daughter is.
She's definitely, yes.
I know. It's so much drama.
He's a little younger. She's definitely up against the wall here. There's something else different is, I did incorporate points of view of her girl gang into the book. That's not usually, traditionally, I've only ever had the points of view of the hero and the heroine. Mm-hmm. So it was different. It was fun writing such a layered story with lots of voices. And I know readers are picking up like, which one's next?
Yeah, of course.
So that's, that's fun. She's a heroine, as Sarah said, up against the wall, but each one of them is and will be. Yeah. I think there's only maybe one in the group that's not married. And I don't know, it's a group of 6, 7, I don't know necessarily that everyone's going to get a story. I do know that the Duchess is next. That's, I know hers is next, and we'll see. And I'm on the fence which one. It's fun to have so many options. I know the Duchess is next, but I'm not sure who the third one is because there are lots of options, and they're all living like not their best life. So they all deserve something better.
That's really fun. I mean, I think that's also one of the things I have really come to like. I think that those like moments where you get a third or an outside of the love interest point of view can be really effective. There's things that they can't know or see. And I think it's something that is always really fun in a romance because it is uncommon in the genre, right? And that sounds really fun too.
It was definitely a new tool, like something, and writing a scene where like asking myself, in the past, I used to just ask myself this, what I want to happen in the plot, what's moving ahead here, which POV should this be told through? Should it be the hero or the heroine? Which perspective is the most important is how I would tell it. But now I get to ask myself that same question, with so many more possibilities. Like, is it going to be her adult daughter? Is it going to be her best friend? Is it going to be the friend in the group that she doesn't really like, but she's in the group? There's all these possibilities now on how to tell the story.
Do you think that as you continue through the series, you'll continue doing that? Will that be like a hallmark of this series?
It's so funny. I think I'll have multiple POVs, but I'm doing something different in book 2 that I didn't even know I was doing it. I started to write it and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, so that,
now I want to know.
You can teach a dog new tricks. Okay. I'm doing something right now as I'm writing the Duchess, telling a scene that I don't want to give it away.
Don't give it away.
Don't give it away.
I'm not going to give it away.
You'll have to return in a year and we'll talk about it.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
I just think what's fascinating about this is, you say you can teach an old dog new tricks, but, so often when we talk about romance, when people from outside the genre talk about romance and within, it starts to feel like, oh, well, I know what to expect from whatever author's books, right? Like, I know what it's going to be. And so it's always cool, I think, when somebody tries something different, right? When you start, and especially when it's something that's really uncommon in the genre, like lots of different POVs, right? So I think I'm just so excited for this book. I'm so excited for everybody to read it. And I love this group of women a whole lot because they do feel so real.
And that's what keeps us going, right? And that's what I think will keep this genre going too. Like, what Mom used to make, but different.
Yeah.
Like
exactly the same, but completely different. I think about that all the time.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by the Vow Collective. Vow is an organization of writers fighting for fair pay and transparency. Together, they work on creative projects, video games, and romance anthologies.
They sure do. And their new romance anthology, which is called Long Summer Nights, is an LGBTQ plus paranormal romance anthology set in a shared urban fantasy universe in a made-up jewel of the Gulf Coast city called Long Summer. And in this kind of special city are demons and fae and vampires and ghosts and also humans. And it's this fascinating place where there is an unspoken agreement that supernatural beings have to hide their true nature. But we all know that that's not how it works.
Not in this city of monsters. It has a way of bringing lovers together with magical results.
There are 15 separate stories in this anthology. There's something here for everyone, no matter what kind of monster you love to read about. I'm going to bet that it's in here. And I'm super excited because the other cool thing about this,
it's so cool,
is that it is not available on Amazon. You can only get it through Kobo or itch.io. We are going to put the links in show notes. And right now, if your podcatching software does this, you'll be able to click the link right in the chapter header, and it will take you to vowtogether.itch.io/longsummer-nights, where you can buy this anthology and have a great time reading 15 paranormal romances.
Absolutely. 100% of the profits go to the creators. So it's a really cool way to find out some new authors. I am personally excited about the one. Listen to this, Sarah. A person who is afraid of dolls falls in love with a living doll. Woo.
Oh, boy. It's going to happen.
Thank you so much to the Vow Collective for sponsoring this week's episode.
Okay, so I know you came with recommendations for other series. So this series is called the Scandalous Ladies
Real
of
Housewives.
London. The Real Housewives of London. This series is the Scandalous Ladies of London, and the first book, The Countess, is out now. You have a number of other series. If somebody reads The Countess, or wants to start with a series that you've written that is centered on women's friendships, where would you recommend they start?
I'm really disposed towards my Penwick School for Virtuous Girls. They began at essentially like they were orphaned. They're like at a home together, and then went out into the real world, but still always come back together. That's like real, like girls that have your back. I talk about that with my daughter. There's certain friends of hers that she'd want with her in a knife fight, and that's
yes,
that's what those girls are. Those heroines, and yes,
that series begins with my favorite Sophie Jordan book ever,
it does.
which is Sins of a Wicked Duke, which I recommend to people with two things. One, it's a heroine in disguise as a footman, and two, there is a bathtub scene that will wreck you. And like, if those two things don't sell it for you, I don't know.
Then I don't even. Right.
Why are you? I was going to add. I think Sarah's favorite book is in that series.
It's the first one in that series, and it's terrific.
Yes. So if you would look up, if you could just do a search for the Penwick School Virtuous Girls, and the whole series would pop up. What else?
No, I think that's a good start.
Yeah.
So, do you have? I know you have other recommendations. Do you want to? Do you want to start? Do you have a series that you recommend?
I read a couple months ago. I had an early copy of Liana de la Rosa's Anna Maria and the Fox.
This is like, I cannot wait to read it.
It's very different. I love that it's, they are linked through sisters. So you get the first sister in the first book, and they are Mexican heiresses in England. It's just a different history too that is revealed, like what's going on in Mexican history at the time, and how that relates to the world, and what's in Britain, why they're there. I don't want to give away too much. They were really essentially there. They've kind of fled. So it's a great story. I'm really excited for the next two books, The Other Sisters. Adriana Herrera's second cover, just The Island Princess.
Oh, yes.
Starts a scandal. I saw the cover. That just dropped, and I'm super excited. I think, most of us should be familiar with the first book in that series, the Caribbean-era. So
yeah.
Excited about that as well. I think Joanna Shoop's Uptown Girls, if you love a different era, because I love that Gilded Age.
Yeah. I was going to talk about that one too, especially one of the things that and look, like I said, I am not bringing anything new to the table today. Like, I am just talking about like my favorites. But the thing I love about that series, right? It's three sisters. Is they're all really, and now I don't have any sisters, so part of me is just like fascinated by books about sisters in general. But the thing I love about that series is, like, in book 1 and book 2, you get Mamie and Florence just like breaking all the rules, doing whatever they want, right? And then when it's Justine's book, they are like, what are you doing? How dare you? And I am obsessed with like the way the like the portrayal of those sisters like evolves, right? Because you're kind of like, Justine's like, what the hell are you two talking about? Look what you two did, right? How dare you tell me that I can't do that? And I think that I really love that, because I do think it really taps into the ways in which like, do as I say, not as I do. It really is
which
like,
is so sister drama.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. So I like, that's like one of my favorites, is like how just pissed Justine is in that book, in The Devil of Downtown, which is book number 3, that like her sisters who just like, especially with Florence, like you're like, wait, Florence is policing Justine?
You own a casino now. What are you doing?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that to me was on my list too. Just like how great the portrayal of those sisters are. And how I think too, the thing about like that Sarah was saying, like, like we get to weigh in on your choice
now
of
we're
love
in charge.
interest.
Right. I think you'll like the Anna Maria and the Fox. They're very like that with each other. Those sisters, because there's no one that's going to call you out like a sister, and it doesn't matter what like you said.
Right.
Like, I can behave this way, but who are you? You can't do that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's funny. I'm the same way. I sort of started thinking about sisters and friend groups together, but you mentioned, Sophie, the Las Leonas, Adriana's historical series, but I also think we have to talk about Dating in Dallas, which is Adriana's contemporary series. It begins with Here to Stay, and the second one is called
On the Hustle.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the second one is called On the Hustle. And that is a friend group of, what I love about that series is it begins, Here to Stay, it's set in Dallas. Here to Stay, the main character of Here to Stay, is living in Dallas and has a really rich sort of group of friends in Dallas. And you fall in love with these friends almost instantly. Before you even fall in love with the hero in this book. And then, of course, the hero comes in and they do the kind of thing that friends should be doing. What I love about that series, though, is that in the second one, and On the Hustle, the heroine moves to Dallas. She sort of takes off from New York and moves to Dallas. And the romance itself is so great, because the premise of the romance of that book is that the hero is her boss, and she quits because he's terrible. Yes. And the moment he quits, again, full catnip trope for me, he realizes, oh God, I can't live without her. And then he has to like basically grand gesture his way across the United States to.
And that is what it's.
Love it.
That's all I want. Suffer. Yeah. I want men suffering. He gets to, so they both end up in Dallas. But when she gets there, she has to build a community. It's not just like it's there. She knows people, she meets people, but it's not her community. It's not her place. And she has to sort it out. And that kind of modeling, I mean, like, is that the word I'm looking for? I guess it kind of is, where like it's hard to build a community of friends when you are older, right? And when you have moved to a new place. And Adriana marks that in a really great way.
Yeah, I agree.
And so that is really, I was thinking this morning, like, I would like more, one of my favorite, I try really hard not to talk about my books, but one of my favorite things I think the experience of writing a character, and as you both know, the experience of writing for me is very rarely positive. But one of the most positive things I feel like I ever felt while I was writing was when I was writing A Scot in the Dark, where the premise of that book is that the heroine is just desperately lonely. Like, she's never had a family.
I love that book.
She's never had friends. She is the most beautiful girl in any room, and everyone hates her for it. And she is...
my heart aches.
She is so lonely.
Yeah.
And she meets, that's the series, Scandal and Scoundrel, and it is knitted together by a group of sisters, but she is not one of them. She is just this like lonely girl who then falls into this group of sisters, and they embrace her. And so her happily ever after becomes not just the hero, enormous duke who breaks furniture and knocks down doors, though that is great for her. But also finding a community of girls who have her back,
which is really interesting. It really is like you're writing a dual love story in that sense. You know, like when you have the tight knit group of friends, and then you have the heroes. It is like we're crafting something that is like two stories, two love affairs. And those stories, I can remember the ones that I remember like that. Like when you're talking about like a woman who's an island at the beginning, and the books are so much better. The ones where they do fall into friends, right? They fall into love, and then they fall into friends. And just the aching you feel for her in the beginning and where she arrives.
Yeah, I mean, well, as Jen said, like I feel like the primordial one of those is Julie Garwood's The Gift, which is you know, when she becomes a part of the clan, and there is that moment at the end where they all pay for her. They pay for her. Payment for Lady Kincaid, as you said.
Payment for the Lady Kincaid. So I want to talk about a book I really liked that I think did this so well. Is a book called and I've talked about this book before. Again, sorry, everybody. You have to listen to me talk about it again. A book called I Kissed a Girl by Jeanette Alexander. And in this book, it takes place on the set of a horror movie. And there is Noah Birnbaum is the makeup artist on the horror movie. And this is like a really big deal for her. I think she's even like essentially like it's like a new adult romance, has maybe left college, because this is like like a union job essentially, right? So like if she gets this credit, then she could actually work bigger and better movies. So it's almost like this really wild thing she's doing to like go out. And she and her best friend and her roommate, who's is like kind of like a little, they're like part of the queer community, but like a little judgy maybe of like the kind of lipstick lesbians. Now, again, I'm really apologizing if I get all this like nomenclature wrong, but the heroine, her love interest is a woman named Lila Silver, who is like going to be the final girl in the movie. And in horror, the final girl is like the last one alive, right? Like literally, like talk about a classic horror trope. And this is a big deal for her because she is like, it's her first like kind of starring role. She's never made it to be the final girl before, but she like really didn't feel like she could come out. She came from like a small Michigan town, like up in the, like way up, like not to the Upper Peninsula, but pretty close. And she's really like the way that like Lila and Noah have to essentially engage in like the kinds of things I like. I'm still like a qualified, like I still get to be part of the queer community, even if I like roughly shit, right? Or whatever for Lila. And like Noah's judgment and protection of her roommate and best friend who is a trans woman. And I think it really is like a really beautiful exploration of like how they have to become friends. I mean, in this case, like the friends become lovers, right? Although this is like I think kisses only. It's like a sweet, sweet book. But I just really found myself thinking like it captured in a way that many romances don't, how hard it is, like that journey of like, I'm busy finding myself, but I'm judging other people who haven't found themselves yet. And, right? Does that make sense? And I just, this book I read a couple of years ago, and it really stuck with me. Like it's one of those books that I really wish like more people knew about. And because I think it's just a really terrific example of like, if someone was like, I really want a new adult romance, this is almost always the one I say like really like leans into what does that really mean and what does that really look like. It's great.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Victoria Lum, author of The Sweetest Agony. Now, here's a book for everyone out there who's always asking us to give them more friends to lovers romances. This one is full of long distance pining and unrequited love. Jess, our main character, has it all together. She has a great job. She has a great life. She has a great boyfriend. And as is always the case in these books, it all falls apart. And when it does, she turns to the one person who has always been there, her best friend from high school, James. Here's the catch. James moved away when they were in high school. And now their relationship has been built over the years on long distance video chatting, and that's it. They haven't seen each other since high school. Of course, James harbors a very big, very long-standing, unrequited love for Jess. When he sees his opportunity to finally shoot his shot, he does not hesitate. He walks into town, and let me tell you something, this guy doesn't look like a high school boy anymore. He doesn't act like a high school boy anymore. And we get to watch Jess fall fully in love with this man who she's loved forever, which is the real promise of the premise with Friends to Lovers. You can get The Sweetest Agony in print or ebook or with a monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. Thanks so much to Victoria Lum for sponsoring the episode. Well, since you're talking about queer romance, I want to talk about Ashley Herring Blake's series.
Right. Sure. With the
Bright Falls series, so it begins with Delilah Green Doesn't Care. And then it goes to Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. And then the third one, which is coming out this year, is called Iris Kelly Doesn't Date. And
great titles.
Yeah, I mean, great titles. And I will say, I had heard about these books and I'd had them on a pile, but in that way that sometimes you just have a book on a pile and like don't get to it. And then I was at our friend's pocket bookshop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is a queer, feminist, anti-racist bookstore in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and they are fabulous. And if you ever get a chance to be out there, head over there because it's in a gorgeous, it's like the perfect bookstore. This is me pausing to just talk about how perfect this bookstore is, which I've done before, but it's like in a big old Victorian with a wraparound porch, and like there are all these nooks and crannies, and all I want to do is just live in this bookstore. But anyway, the owners of this bookstore had a stack of this was not when Delilah Green came out, but they had a stack of Delilah Green books literally next to the register. And I was like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And they were like, "Oh, we just hand sell this book to literally everybody who comes through here." Like, and I was like, "I love that you're just like, we love it so much. It's just here. Like, it's just so we don't have to go running." So, I immediately read it, and it really was delightful. And what this speaks to, Sophie, what you were saying about the friend relationship not necessarily being entirely there at the beginning. Like, you're connected, but you're not each other's people. So in the first book, Delilah, who has like left town and sort of sworn that she would never come back to this like tiny town outside of Portland, is sort of comes back to Bright Falls because her stepsister Astrid from the second book is getting married and she needs a photographer. Delilah's a photographer, and and she offers her a bunch of money and sort of makes it impossible for her to say no. So Delilah comes back to Bright Falls, where she meets when they were young, Delilah and Astrid were stepsisters. Astrid had these like friends who were not nice to Delilah. Like they were all like the kind of rich, kind of stuck up Bright Falls crew, and Delilah was like kind of an outcast, which is why she took off and said like, I'm never coming back. So she gets there and she's taking pictures of the stepsister's wedding, which of course doesn't happen because she's the hero.
I know. I was like, something must happen there.
Right. So she's taking pictures of the stepsister's wedding, and she like slowly falls in love with this woman, Claire, who they were not, like, they did not get along when they were young. There's a third friend, Iris, who is the heroine of one of the heroines of the third book. I haven't read that book because it's not out yet. But there is the connections here are very fragile at the beginning because nobody really, it comes from that sort of youthful, we were all trying to make our way and understand each other. And there were miscommunications and maybe like we didn't really like you or we thought you were a little weird, but now we're growing up and like that's not the same anymore. But all that baggage from youth is still kind of there. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, when you return home to the place where you were the weirdo outcast,
right,
that you swore you'd never return home to, it's very hard to shake that off. And so what happens in this book is Delilah falls in love with Claire and then at the same time kind of inherits this friend group that she was always kind of nervous around when she was young. And so what I love about it is over the course of the series from Delilah Green through the Astrid Parker book, and now with Iris, the third book that's coming, what's fascinating about it is where the first two had their own kind of messy friendship navigation. In Iris's book, they are a tight-knit community of friends, and Iris is the only one who is single. And so she is both like happy for all of her friends for matching, for like partnering up, but also wants that for herself. And so it has that other piece of the balance where it's like, now all my friends are partnered.
Right.
Where do I go from here? So that's that series, the Bright Falls series.
Luckily, it's a romance series, so everyone gets their turn.
Everybody gets their turn in this tiny little town. There's so many single, beautiful people.
Love it when you know it's coming. Love reading the book where you know that the side character you're falling in love with is next.
Exactly.
Can we talk about justice for Enid? Just gonna throw that out there.
Oh, yeah.
I have not forgotten.
I'm fine, Sophie. I'm fine.
I will say I have not. For those of you, if you are one of the many
someone
people
explain what that means.
Emailed, tweeted, messaged me about Enid. I have not forgotten her.
She's a secondary character in one of the I mean, you guys, titles have no meaning, so I don't remember which one, but it was like
because she was in
a couple of them books. Yeah,
I think that's part of the quote problem, although I won't say a problem, is that she was a secondary character in at least 3 books.
This is the one.
That's the problem. Too many books.
Yes.
Yeah. You are always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Yes, she was. She actually was enamored with the hero of The Scandal of It All. And he ends up falling for her stepmother, her widowed stepmother, which is just, a slap in the face for her. She feels like, yes, like, I've liked him since I was a girl, and he fell for my stepmother. Of course,
that does seem terrible. Yeah.
So Enid deserves it, and I fully acknowledge that.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
You know what you should call it?
I have not forgotten her.
You should call it Enid's a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Yeah,
and it should be just like a cool novella that goes out.
Sure. The messaging will be clear because when she gets her story, Enid's name is going to be in the title for sure. 100%. Like Enid's day has finally arrived.
I honestly listen. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
simple. I really, literally just need this is like, I think where I'm different. I know, like, you guys, it's honestly terrible for you to like nag your favorite romance authors for not writing a secondary character you love. But I'm just like, all you have to do is like send me an email that was like, she met a nice man who lives next door and now they have 3 dogs. And I'll be like,
that doesn't work.
Amazing.
FYI. Maybe it works.
It does for me. I'm simple.
Maybe for you.
But how many times have I said,
simpleton.
Benedict is fine. Yeah. He met somebody. He's happy. They live happily ever after.
Right.
People are like, what about Benedict?
They read by the fire. It's all very delightful and domestic.
Yes.
I'm dumb, everybody. So
you're very kind and easy that way. But
I am
if
easy.
That's the case, I do know her story. So Jennifer, when we hang up,
that's
I'm just going to call
me
you
back
and I'm going to
like,
tell you exactly what happens because when I've already got it plotted, I just got to have minutes and the days to do it. But yes.
I also was thinking, okay, so I feel like another real like comfort read for me is The Brown Sisters by Chloe Chloe Brown, like
Chloe Brown
Mhm.
by Talia Hibbert.
Right.
I was like,
Yes.
listen, when you put the I'm like, who
know,
are
the
these
names.
characters? And then you put them in the title and you'd think I'd like it, but somehow I'm a fucking mess. So yeah, Talia Hibbert's Brown Sisters series, I think is another really like such a comfort read for me. Like just I love these women. They're truly like funny. You know, everybody knows I have issues with like rom-coms not actually being funny at all. But these books really are fun and funny. And I think I think depending on who you talk to, everyone has their favorite of the series. And I love Chloe, I think in some ways. I like the white one and the blue one. The yellow one is not my favorite. I think that's Chloe and Eve, if I have it right. Yeah. And I just really love Chloe, I think, because Chloe Brown starts off with her essentially deciding she doesn't want the life she wants, and she's gonna go get it.
She's nearly hit by a bus.
Yes,
And
right.
then
And
she's
she
like, oh God.
has like a come to Jesus moment or whatever, and was like, I have to change my life. And so that involves like moving out of her family's home and having her own apartment. And she suffers from a chronic illness, and so that's like been a really big impediment to her having that life. And so it's like finding someone who's gonna like understand her, and she ends up of course being in this like kind of hate fueled like but really we lust after each other relationship with the guy who in her building, and it's great. And I just think that that's like a really great example of I think that's going to be a timeless romance series actually. I think we're going to love that one for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to just name check. We've talked about these books so much that I want to name check Alexis Daria's most recent current series.
Yeah.
Which now, of course, the name of the series is away from me.
A lot like Adios and
Wait, hang on.
You Had Me at Hola.
No. Hang on.
Sorry.
You're like, whatever, who cares?
Who needs a series name when you have a title?
You have the author name.
We're
You can
talking
just
about
look
The
at
series.
reason I
their-
know this is true is because I recently was looking at Amazon. I'm going to talk while Sarah looks this up. And
Yeah.
every time you have heard Sarah talk about the Casino series,
It's not called that.
it's not called that.
that.
So listen, just slow your roll.
It's called The Rules of Scoundrels.
And I was
The
like,
Casino
what's...
series. I don't know, because that's what it is in my head.
But I'm just saying.
Listen,
It's just
apparently
like
this is
Overboard.
not.
It's not. Mhm.
This is so funny. I thought there was a series title, but apparently there isn't because it's not on Kindle, so it doesn't.
Well,
It's
there you
not
go.
on
It doesn't
Amazon, so it
exist.
doesn't exist. Anyway, this series, The Primas of Power, is what I was looking for there, but that's not apparently the name of the series. It begins with You Had Me at Hola, which we did a deep dive on. The second book is a lot like Adios, and there is a third book coming, and the books are connected via cousins. Which is very cool. I have a lot of like longing for cousin relationships because I don't have any cousins in the United States. And so I don't have this like, oh, my cousin is just always around and like hanging out with me. And Alexis really nails that feeling of like having cousins who are so close and know you and your family and all your like baggage, like all
Right.
the buttons, everything, but are just a touch distant from siblings, so they're able to kind of be more friendly than
Right.
us
Like that,
sisters say.
that part of like that competition part is kind of gone. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's something. My daughter is best friends with one of her cousins, and there's just something there that they were allowed that love from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, because that rivalry was lifted somehow.
Yeah. And so Alexis really nails this. They call themselves the Primas of Power, and they're really, really fun. And then, of course, Tracy Livesey's Girls Trip series, which I hear she's writing the
I
third
was
book on.
I was actually going to ask because that was on my list too. I was like, I wonder if she's going to finish writing that series.
Right. We've talked about that book a lot too. The Girls Trip series is 4 best friends from college who have been traveling. They have taken
Like a
a
yearly
summer
vacation.
trip. They have
Yeah.
a yearly trip that they have been doing since they were in college. And each one begins with that trip and either, one missed somebody having to leave. The first book is somebody having to leave the trip early because of work. It's somebody or missing the trip. But the friends are so much a part of that
Right.
journey to love.
Sophie, I don't know if you have other ones that I actually have I would like to make a case for Ice Planet Barbarians.
Oh, now.
Well, those women
Right?
have certainly bonded.
Now you happen to be with the person who brought Ice Planet Barbarians to all of us, Jen, because I'm
Yes.
pretty sure
I
Sophie
feel
brought it
like-
to me
Right?
and I brought it to you.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Where's my royalty check? That's what I want to know. So, because when I first introduced that and started talking about it, people looked at me like I was insane.
Yeah.
No, I remember.
We were at a retreat, Sarah, and there was a writer there who actually mocked me. The writer will remain nameless,
Oh,
but
I
she
know.
mocked me for
She's
it.
in my burn book. I know.
I actually
I was like, seriously, this is a brilliant series.
Yeah.
I said, this has some seriously ingenious world building.
Yeah.
And then I got a laugh when I said that, but
Yeah.
it is true.
No, listen,
It is.
And now the whole world knows it.
Yes, I will never stop talking about the fact that when you are in the hero's POVs in that series and the heroine is speaking in English and he's listening to her and it's just sound, you as the reader can still understand what she is saying. And that is genius.
Well, and I think it's really ramps up that whole we have to rely on each other.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Right?
when they've really come through a trauma together,
Yeah.
they've survived and are surviving something together.
Yeah. It's
And
what we're talking
until-
about. They don't know each other.
You're right.
And then they
Right.
They don't. Yeah. So they come into this world together.
maybe
Start
somebody
with the
should
first
explain
romance.
how this series begins.
Sophie.
Check your content
Gosh.
warnings, everybody.
I mean,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
right.
I mean, it's so okay. Well, these women are abducted from Earth, and they are abducted by, let's just call the baddies, but they crash land on this other planet. And I think it's important to know they are not abducted
Right.
by
the blue aliens.
the heroes.
abducted
on
by,
the blue
like,
aliens. Another alien species.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
to
is
be sold
yeah.
as fertile ground for
Yeah.
Right. And all I remember is their heads look like basketballs. Do y'all
Yes,
remember
I do.
that?
They're
Like, they've
basketball head ones, yeah.
Right. So those are the baddies. And they crash land on the planet with the, Ice Planet Barbarians, and that's where they must learn to survive. And in the first book, the first, heroine makes contact with the first one. That's your first story.
So maybe there are
How many books are we on?
There are maybe 20 of them.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
there's so many now. Yeah.
There's so many.
No, but
and
there
the
are
books
maybe
go
20
on.
girls.
Oh, 20.
Right.
Maybe
And-
not. Maybe we're never
No.
told because there are so many of them.
You know what happens is it's smart. The first group is there's actually clarity at some point that there was a group of women who were kidnapped and kind of put in stasis, who don't really know what's going on, and then a second group of women. And these are the first 6 heroines maybe were kind of figure out that they were extra cargo, and they are the ones who are aware of what's going on, and so then when they go back and kind of take the other women out who are where the hell are we? So it's a kind of an interesting way of continue. You know what I mean? It's a really
Right.
listen.
But it's also fated mates, right? Don't
Yeah.
they vibrate? The men vibrate when they meet their fated
In
mates.
the first, right. They have what's called the queen.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
how you would pronounce it? I would have to hear the audiobook to
I
know
think
the
so,
exact
too.
pronunciation of it.
That's how I pronounce
But,
it in my head.
yeah.
Okay. It wakens. And what I love, what's interesting about this book. And so in the first book, of course, the hero and the heroine, her queen wakes for him. Fated mates, right? He's the one we must mate. Now, in the subsequent books, the queen might waken, but later on. It doesn't
It's yeah.
come
Well,
alive.
don't they have
the
to
first
insert
time
it?
necessarily.
Yes.
You have to it's like a worm that they put inside you.
And the reason why is because it
alive.
keeps you warm. Like it has its two purposes. Where everyone right now
these
is like,
women
you guys
will
are
die.
dummies.
Are we doing? We've now moved fully far
No, but the
afield.
women will die without their mate.
Right.
Like on this ice planet, they cannot survive until their queen is awakened and their hero is, they've made it. They come together. So, I mean.
But I think the thing that's like also really interesting is like these, when you have everything else stripped away from you except the fact that like we are humans together, right? Like the way that these women like sort of support each other, and some of them like
no choice.
I don't want a partner here. Like some of them, and
every one of them
it's really
react
great.
so differently. They are different who they are as people who've come into it, and they are going to handle this struggle, this being thrown into this world of survive, adapt, or die.
Yes.
And they're all different people, and they all react differently. And some you like more than others, some you don't. Some grow up and snap out of it. It's really, that's what I think is so you love.
No,
like
Ruby
it's
Dixon
here's
knows
this huge cast.
She knows the job. She is a great writer, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise. For those of you out there who are like, Ice Planet Barbarians is my favorite, I wish I had more people to talk to about it. There is a whole podcast,
and it's awesome. Yes.
It's called Ice Planet Podcast, and it's hosted by our friend Danny. And you can go listen to it. There are lots of. Were you ever a guest on it, Sophie?
No,
I was.
I have not
and
been.
You were, yeah.
Yeah, I was, and Jen was. But but you can go. It's exactly like when Fated Mates started, and we just did a deep dive on Fated on
on books.
What's the name of that series?
Right, right.
Immortals After Dark.
Immortals After Dark.
Yeah, sure.
But she does a deep dive on. She has guests, and they do a deep dive on every book. And so head over there and listen to those. They're super fun.
So yeah, I was sort of thinking, I was like, look, talk about because there's no choice for those women, right? Like, it's like, we have to make a community together. And unlike, I like what you were saying at the beginning about the Countess, right? Like some of the people are in your group and some aren't. Like in this case, right? These women are literally like,
make it work.
Yeah, we have to make it work like together. I think that, don't sleep on that. Like Ice Planet Barbarians is like kind of fun and hot. Yeah. I mean, especially the first one, I think it really has like a different flavor. But, it's also so much about them really figuring out how to be a community together, right? And I really like that. So,
Sophie Jordan, it is always a joy to have you. We love your books here at Fated Mates. We talk about them all the time, and I love your face as my friend.
Thank you so much. I love hanging out with you guys on Fated Mates, and the rare occasions otherwise.
Really excited about the Countess.
Yes, the Countess is in stores right now. It came out yesterday, so you can get it wherever you get your books. And as a special treat for Fated Mates listeners, if you hang on after the end of this episode, you will get to listen to the beginning of the audiobook right away. Do you know who the narrator is, Sophie?
It's Justine
Eyre.
Yes, she's great. She's fun, and I thought because there are many voices.
Oh yeah,
I thought she did a really
She's great.
Good job.
Justine was a guest on the pod once. So.
That's right, because she did a lot of your books. So.
She did the Bare Knuckle Bastard series for me. So that's exciting. Stay tuned for that. You are listening to Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I'm here with Jen Prokop. You may have a local election coming up where people are running for library boards. Book banning is happening around the country. Don't forget to check that out. Make sure you go to vote in your local election.
Your school boards are important.
School boards.
Local school board elections. Yeah.
Yes, local school board elections. As if you missed last week's episode, there is about 15 minutes with our friend Jarrett Dapier talking about book banning and elections and how we can help. But the best and fastest and most urgent way you can help is to find out when your local elections are and to learn more about who is running. Don't forget to do that. There are links and show notes to all of that stuff. Thanks to our sponsors, the Vow Together Collective, and to Victoria Lum, author of The Sweetest Agony, for sponsoring the episode. Also, immediately following this episode, you'll be able to listen to the first 2 chapters of Sophie Jordan's brand new book out this week, The Countess, part of her Scandalous Ladies of London series. Enjoy.
Chapter 1. A lady rarely chooses her husband, but she may choose her friends. Is it any wonder she prefers her friends' company? Gertrude, the Countess of Chatham. Grosvenor Square, London, England. Gertrude set the scandal rag down with a contented little sigh, fully aware that this might have been the first time she had ever touched the wretched paper with anything other than contempt in her heart. As much as she loathed scandal rags for all the damage they could do, and did, this one was positively delightful. None of its usual swill, to be sure. Good things were happening for Delia, and this signalled it. She would have choices, her pick of suitors, a fate of her own design. All things True had vowed her daughter would have. It was all coming together quite nicely. She reached for her nearby cup of tea. "You look very pleased with yourself," Hilda said as she fluttered about the bedchamber, tidying the space and gathering things to ready True for the day. "Oh, I am. And it has to do with that." Hilda pointed at a discarded slipper at the newspaper in dubious fashion. "Indeed, Delia has found herself a subject of high praise in the tittle-tattle today." Chatham himself might have been delivered a subtle slap, but no insult had been done to Delia. There was that, and that was everything. "Oh!" Her maid's eyebrows winged high. "Has she now?" Hilda gently draped True's freshly pressed day dress upon the chaise. "Then Lady Delia should be pleased." "Indeed." True nodded, her smile less than certain. She hoped so. This portended great things her daughter was too young and inexperienced to appreciate, but True did. True wholly understood. Hilda angled her head thoughtfully. "What do you think, my lady? Your pearls, or perhaps the sapphire brooch is best?" True considered the sunny yellow frock she was to wear that day. "Sapphires feel more suitable for spring, I think." Nodding agreeably, her maid helped her dress for the day, cinching her tightly into her corset. "Not too tight," True instructed. Gone were the days of a minuscule waist. She cared for cook's crumpets far too much. "I'd like to breathe." "Yes, my lady." True studied her wild-haired reflection in her cheval mirror. She'd suffered a restless night fretting over Delia's first season, and her hair bore testament to that. It would take Hilda some time to tame the riotous tumble into something presentable. She sighed. People always said life was short, but it was interminably long when miserable, when unhappily matched. The days dragged then, plodding unhurriedly along like the slow, gentle drip of water from an eave. Days turned to weeks, turned to months, turned to years with no reprieve. Delia would be spared that. And yet, even as True entertained that comforting thought, there was a niggling worry. A dark little suspicion worming through her mind that could have been prescience if she was one to believe in such foolishness, which she most definitely was not. There was only the happiness, or unhappiness, one made and claimed in this life. She would see to it that her daughter was given every chance to claim that happiness for herself. Jasper Thorne read the paper, and then read it again before lowering it to his chest. He had yet to rise from his bed. Steam wafted from the cup of coffee his valet had poured for him, and left on a tray on his night table, welcoming him to the day. In the distance, he could hear the servants stirring in the bowels of the building. The scandal rags weren't his usual proclivity, but life had a way of changing, surprising even him. And that meant he found himself not only waited upon by a valet, but reading the society pages and gossip columns, as though he were a blue-blooded gentleman who cared for such things. How else was he to learn about the world he wished to infiltrate? "The belle of the season has arrived." "Lady Cordelia Chatham," he murmured, testing out the sound of her name on his tongue. Lady Cordelia. She sounded precisely like what he was looking for. Whom he was looking for. He flicked the back of his fingers against the paper in satisfaction. Those wishing for a titled and well-positioned bride need look no further. Indeed. The Earl of Chatham shot straight up in bed, fisting the paper in his hand in astonishment, a curse bursting from his lips. He read again, distrusting his eyes. Lady Cordelia Chatham, his daughter. How old was the girl? His mind raced, quickly doing the math. The chit was out. He could not recall the last time he had seen her. He certainly had not thought of her in, well, perhaps ever. Not beyond the day of her birth, when the midwife had emerged to inform him he had a daughter. A girl. A useless girl. Not a son. He looked again at the paper. Perhaps not so useless after all. In his mind, she still wore plaits and spent her days in the nursery, doing whatever it was female children did. Somehow she had moved past that, though. She was grown, and his wife had missed apprising him of that fact. Of course. Gertie was a priggish cow, not wont to do anything to satisfy him. The woman sleeping next to him stirred, but she did not move from the warm nest of his bed. With her eyes still closed, she reached for the bedding and pulled it up over the naked curve of her enticing hip. Since the moment he had married Gertie, she had been an acute disappointment, a yoke about his neck, his one great regret, but there was no undoing it. Unfortunately, his wife was hale and hearty, and would likely outlive him. He was stuck with her. "Stupid woman," he muttered. The sound of his voice startled his bedmate. She lifted her head with an inarticulate mutter, followed by, "What is happening?" "Nothing to concern yourself with. Go back to sleep," he commanded. "Then stop talking, would you?" He glared down at the prime piece curled up beside him. She was a saucy bit of baggage, but he had spent substantial time and money wooing and winning her, so he would not begrudge her the impudence. He would endure her saucy mouth if it meant he got to have that mouth whenever and wherever he wanted it. "It's my daughter," he grumbled. Fatima opened a bleary eye. "Your daughter? Didn't know you had one." "Apparently she's taken her curtsy and I missed it." "How's that?" Fatima propped herself up on her elbow, looking delicious in her sleep-mussed state as she squinted at the paper in his hand. "My wife failed to mention it." "Your wife? You have one of those too?" "Of course I do," he sneered. "And you don't live together?" "Good God, no." He'd gotten his own place shortly after their wedding, a lifetime ago. "Then how would she inform you?" He scowled at her reasoning. "Are you siding with her? The Countess of Chatham might be admired by the ton, but I know her to be a—" "Oh, the Countess of Chatham. I spotted a letter from her on your desk in your study. Quite pretty penmanship, I remember thinking." "There is. When did it arrive?" She shrugged one delectable shoulder. "I don't know. Weeks ago." "Weeks ago? Why did you not tell me, you daft woman?" Her expression clouded. "I am not your secretary. It is on your desk. It is not my fault you chose to ignore it. It has been there with all the rest of the correspondence you've been neglecting for some time." He compressed his lips. It was on his desk, unopened alongside countless unattended bills from the finest merchants in London. The draper, the haberdasher, his club. They were all a pesky lot. Bloody impertinent nuisances, daring to beleaguer him as though he were of no account and not an earl of the realm. In truth, he had probably seen the letter and ignored it. A letter from his wife would have been viewed as something bothersome, equal to that of a bill. He would have pushed it to the side and forgotten it, much as he had done with her. No matter now. Now he knew. Now he could take control. His daughter was of marriageable age. Suddenly she was of use, and he intended to use her to full advantage. The Duchess of Dedham let out a whoop of triumph over her eggs and kippers and surged to her feet. The footman dozing near the door to the dining room jolted awake, blinking wildly.
Is anything amiss, Your Grace?
Valencia crushed the paper in her hand and waved it aloft. Nothing is wrong at all. Indeed, everything is quite right. At least for dear Delia. She'd just become the toast of the season. True must be thrilled. Navigating her sweet daughter through the choppy waters of the marriage mart had just become a less challenging prospect. Still grinning, Valencia sank back into her seat at the table. Her smile slipped. She stared around her at the empty chairs surrounding the length and blew out a breath. It was a lonely sight, as it was every morning. She had thought her husband and children would occupy these seats by now, except there were no children, and her husband was not the husband she had married. When she'd married Dedham, she had envisioned a great many things. She had not, however, imagined her mornings spent in such lonely solitude, but here she was. This was her life, her lot. If not for her friends, it would be an abject misery. At least Delia would have the chance for something different, something better.
What has you so engrossed, wife?
The Marchioness of Sutton looked up from the papers she was reading, snug in her favourite chair before the fire. Her husband stood in the threshold, leaning heavily on his gold-knobbed and gem-studded cane. Hazel was, as he said, quite engrossed. For no other reason could she not have heard him as he made his way toward the drawing-room doors, his thudding cane always alerted of his advance. "Oh, the tittle-tattle is full of delicious material this morning."
As long as it is not about us. We've spent enough time featured in those pages.
The Marquis was correct on that score. Fortunately, things had been quiet lately, peaceful. Her name had not been mentioned in the scandal sheets in quite some time. It was almost as though society had accepted Hazel's presence. "No, this is about Lady Cordelia, Chatham's daughter. Apparently she is favoured as this season's darling."
Indeed. Well, her mother was always a handsome woman.
"Yes, True is quite pretty." Her husband advanced the rest of the way into the room and sank down on a settee near the fire with a slow groan and popping joints. They'd been married 5 years now, and his mobility had diminished greatly in that time. She suspected he would soon be entirely immobile and bedridden. That was what came of marrying a man well into his twilight years. With good fortune and strategy and her mother's careful guidance, such would not become Lady Cordelia's fate. The Countess of Chatham was a wise woman. She would do right by her daughter and see her well matched, perhaps even entrenched in a love match, not living the life of a young woman bound to an old man. Never that. That was only Hazel's fate. Lady Cordelia flung the paper across the room. "Something amiss, my lady?" That infernal rag!" Her maid's gaze followed the paper as it dropped and landed in a crumpled pile on the floor. "I thought you would be pleased." "Pleased! Pleased!" She recognized that her voice had reached shrill proportions, but she could not help herself. "Your mother is pleased." "Mamma!" Delia scowled. "How do you know that?" Stella smiled enigmatically. "The staff knows everything." Delia nodded distractedly. Yes, of course, Mamma had instilled that truth into her, along with countless other dogmas. Always mind your words. Servants might blend into the background, but they were always there, watching, listening. "Quarry," she growled. "I've been reduced to quarry. I am merely prey." Stella's eyes widened. "Would you rather not be remarked upon at all? Or worse, remarked upon and found lacking somehow? Please do not try to be reasonable with me, Stella. I am upset, and I wish to remain so." Her maid nodded good-naturedly and moved to pick up the paper from where Delia had tossed it. "How long do you plan to be, upset?" "I don't know," Delia grumbled, falling back on her bed and glaring reproachfully up at the canopy. "The rest of the day?" Stella gently inquired. "Perhaps." She reached for a pillow and hugged it to her chest. "Well, For 20 minutes at least. You take your 20 minutes, my lady. Stella patted her arm with a chuckle. Gather your mettle. I am certain you will have callers after your resounding success. She gave the crumpled paper a shake for verification. You shall want to rest and be refreshed. The wash of white canopy fabric swam above her until she felt dizzy. So I can be my charming and beautiful self, she muttered. Indeed, Stella agreed. And if I can't? Can't what? What happens if... She paused, moistening her lips. What happens when I can't be? When they all find out that I'm merely a girl and not that very special? Not special at all. What happened then? What happened when they found her to be a fraud? Chapter 2. It is a strange fate that a lady should be valued only for her looks and ability to produce offspring, two qualities that are quite beyond her ability to control. Gertrude, the Countess of Chatham. It was a rare occasion when the Countess of Chatham's husband visited. True was alerted immediately of his presence when Mrs. Fitzgibbon met her at the door of the house upon her return home. Her stomach sank, immediately understanding the implication of her housekeeper's grim expression as she crossed the threshold in a whisper of starched skirts. There was only one reason for such a dark countenance. She did not need to say the words. True knew. The Earl was here. She moistened her lips and swallowed. When did he arrive, Mrs. Fitzgibbon? Over an hour ago, my lady, she answered as she efficiently untied the ribbons of True's cloak and lifted it from her shoulders. Over an hour ago. Chatham would not be happy to be kept waiting that long. Nothing extraordinary in that regard, though. She could not recall a time when the Earl was happy, at least not in her company. Mrs. Fitzgibbon anxiously motioned for a maid to come forward and fetch the parcels the footman carried in behind True and her companions. Fret not, Mrs. Fitzgibbon assured her, no doubt reading the dread in her expression. I've been plying him with food and that French brandy he is so fond of. He is content. Thank you, Mrs. Fitzgibbon. She released a relieved breath, even if she did not fully believe the words herself. Her husband content. Such a thing was impossible. He was always full of complaints. The food, the drink, the very temperature of a room, the company, her, could always be better. Especially her. Nothing was ever good enough for the man. In all the years of their marriage, True doubted she had ever spent a full, uninterrupted month in her husband's company, known simply in her mind as the Earl or Chatham. He had never invited her to call him anything else. The gentleman had been in her presence just enough to sire their 2 children. Procreation, she'd learned, did not require an extended period of time together. In fact, True knew firsthand that the begetting of offspring took only a few moments. If not for the arrival of babies several months later, she would scarcely know Chatham had been in her bedchamber or bed at all. He awaits you in the drawing-room. Mrs. Fitzgibbon motioned to the double doors. They were closed, but True imagined him on the other side, eating and drinking what the housekeeper had generously supplied. True had spotted him a fortnight past at the Marston ball. It had been a cursory glimpse as he made his way to the card-room, where the gentlemen indulged in cigars, whist and hazard. Of course, he had not greeted her. The card-room was his destination. She and Cordelia were not his reason for attending. He was there for only himself. She slipped off her gloves and dropped them into Mrs. Fitzgibbon's waiting hands. Then I won't keep him any longer. She turned back around to where her companions of the day watched with wide eyes. Rosalind and Valencia were equally aware that the Earl's visit was quite the singular event. My apologies, but I must rescind the invitation for refreshments. They had spent the afternoon shopping, and True had suggested they adjourn to her house for tea. We can stay with you, Valencia suggested, her dark eyes kind with concern. Yes, let us join you, Rosalind nodded emphatically. I would be happy to say hello to my brother-in-law. True grimaced, imagining that scenario. Her sister had never pretended to like Chatham, and the sentiment was mutual between them, to be sure. Whenever they were thrust together, their conversation quickly escalated into barbs and thinly veiled insults. That did not help matters. In those moments, it made Chatham even more difficult to manage, and managing her feckless husband had never been True's strong suit. I do not think so, Ros. Go home. I will apprise you tomorrow. If you are certain. Valencia still looked unconvinced. Her distrust was understandable. She knew something of profligate husbands. Thank you for your concern, but I am certain. Her sister and friend stepped forward to press a kiss to her cheek. We shall see you tomorrow. She murmured in agreement, but she had already moved ahead in her thoughts to the man waiting for her on the other side of those doors. At her stoic nod, a liveried footman standing nearby opened the drawing-room doors for her. True stepped inside. The soft snick of the door shutting behind her rang as resoundingly as a bell. She found her husband much as she expected, boots kicked off, stocking-clad feet propped on a footstool as he heartily drank and ate from the full service spread before him. Mrs. Fitzgibbon had supplied him a veritable feast. Even though he did not call often, he was the Earl of Chatham, and the kitchen staff was acquainted with all his preferences. They knew better than to leave him less than satisfied. He might not reside at their Grosvenor Square address, but he was lord and master. He was in control of their livelihoods. Unfortunate but true, and that was never forgotten. True had married at 18, which had not felt so very young at the time. Not when all her friends were also marrying. It was the thing to do, the thing being done. Thinking back to who she was then, she had been absolutely puerile in her naive hopes and unrealistic expectations. She had thought she was living a fairy tale, and Chatham the prince of that story. It was an easy mistake for a young girl to make, a mistake for which she was still paying. Some mistakes were like that, with far-reaching consequences that still stung. Only 6 years older, Chatham had been remarkably handsome in those days, the catch of the season with his boyish good looks. She had been the envy of all her friends. Not that he was hideous now. He was passably attractive for a man of his years, even if his once lush hair was gone. Sparse, pale brown strands stretched across the crown of his head. He bore a slight paunch which he presently seemed intent on feeding, based on the manner in which he voraciously consumed a rack of lamb. She wished she could go back and warn herself not to be lulled by appearances or superficial charm. She wished she had learned the manner of man he was on the inside, before she spoke those ironclad vows. She wished she had resisted her parents' insistence that she accept his proposal. She wished for a great many things, but she did not permit regret to consume her. It would be for naught, as there was no undoing the past. If the past could be rewritten, then she would not have Delia and Charles. Chatham, she greeted, as he had yet to look up and note her arrival in the room. His gaze slid to her. He continued to chew as he surveyed her indolently.
Hello there, wife. Nice of you to finally join me.
I did not know you'd be paying a call today, or I would have been here to greet you. She knew her duty. He ignored the excuse.
Out shopping?
Bond Street, yes. He dropped a bone, picked clean of meat.
You are ever talented at spending my money.
My money? The gall of the man. Everything within her ignited at the unfairness of that remark. She inhaled thinly, resisting the hot rejoinders that burned on her tongue. It was in these moments that she could scarcely reconcile him to the man she had first met, the man she had wed. Chatham did not have 2 coins to rub together when she had married him. He'd been penniless and on the hunt for an heiress, and she'd been every inch of that. One of the shining heiresses of the season, pursued by Chatham and a score of others. True had been the answer to Chatham's prayers, assuming he prayed, and that was unlikely. Her husband was not the devout sort. He prayed at the altar of loose women, gaming hells, and his current favourite horse at Tattersall's. And yet he'd had something to offer, something that made her parents overlook his insolvency. He possessed an old and venerable title, and 2 homes, one in town, and a sprawling ancient mausoleum in the Lake District, with bones that creaked louder than old King George in winter. Both houses were falling down around his ears, but they were still impressive and valuable commodities. It had been more than enough to dazzle her parents, so she'd become the Countess of Chatham. For years they'd lived off her very generous bridal portion. When those funds dwindled low, Chatham returned to her parents for more. Her mother made her painfully aware of that each and every time. Not that it stopped Mamma from handing over money. Appearances mattered. They were everything to Mamma. She could not have her daughter, the Countess of Chatham, going about impoverished. His accusation that she carelessly spent Chatham's money irked, considering her parents supported them, and he brazenly outspent her. Chatham treated himself to only the finest things. After their wedding, he renovated his country seat and bought a 3rd house for himself to live in, away from her and the children. A lavish house in Gresham Square, where he was free to entertain and keep whatever women he chose to warm his bed. He knew nothing of restraint. Whilst he maintained multiple homes, dressed in the height of fashion, spent copious time and money in gambling dens, took lavish trips with lavish women, she lived a demure and unremarked upon existence with the children. "To what do I owe this visit, my lord?"
Yes.
He reached for a wedge of cheese and took a hearty bite.
Our daughter.
She tensed. Never in 18 years had he approached her about their daughter. It was not a subject he broached. He had been uninterested in her upbringing. True had made all the decisions pertaining to Cordelia, and she felt a stab of unwelcome fear at his sudden interest.
"What about her?"
She is 18 now.
"I am wholly aware." If her tone possessed an edge, he did not seem alert to the fact. He dipped another rib into the mint jelly and swirled it around the dish.
"It's time she weds."
Breathe. So that was it, the reason for his visit. She knew this day would come. It was inevitable. Obviously, he would take an interest in their daughter's marital prospects. Delia had become quite the darling of the ton this season, especially since the publication of the tittle-tattle column a week ago. He must have heard that she was well-favoured and decided to do something about it. True had been navigating Delia about society prudently, mindful that her daughter always knew she had choices, that she needn't rush into matrimony, that she should take her time and become well acquainted with her future husband. True would not have Delia repeat her mistakes. She would not have her feel pressured the way True had felt at the age of 18. "Delia has been honoured with a great many prospects," she said carefully. "You should be proud. I am certain in time she will make a fine choice that pleases you."
"Oh, I am quite pleased and ready to reap the rewards."
He finished sucking a rib lengthways into his mouth and then tossed it back down onto the pile accumulating on his plate.
"I have already chosen for her."
A long beat of silence fell in which True replayed her husband's words.
"I have already chosen for her."
The words resonated like a death knell, each word a long, clangorous peal vibrating inside her. She felt ill. He continued.
"I have a fine match for her that will be of great benefit, so long as our daughter pleases him, that is."
An invisible noose tightened around her throat that her hands longed to claw free. His words sent a bitter wash of fear to her mouth. She swallowed against the terrible taste as she fought for her composure. She knew better than to show fear. Fear was vulnerability. Animals attacked the vulnerable, and yes, in this respect, when it came to her husband, the analogy was apt. When she had first married him, she'd been naive enough to think he might care for her feelings. She'd bared her heart to him, revealed her vulnerabilities. but he had not cared. She moved further into the room, her skirts a whisper on the air. She seated herself across from her husband, holding herself poised, and carefully asked, "I beg your pardon?" She had a solid notion of his meaning, but she could not yet bring herself to give voice to it, as though doing so would make her worst suspicions come true. He paused chewing and glared at her.
"Has your hearing begun to fail you in your advanced years?"
Her smile tightened, but she did not rise to the bait. Advanced years, indeed. She was several years younger than Chatham, but he treated her as though she had one foot in the grave. She supposed that made sense to him, though. He preferred his women young. Purportedly, his paramours were not a day over 30.
"I have chosen a husband for Cordelia," he repeated with a heavy dose of exasperation,
clearly annoyed at what he perceived as her denseness. Suspicions confirmed then. She inhaled a shuddering breath. It was inconceivable and yet so very unsurprising. Her husband had scarcely seen their daughter over the course of her life, but now he had found a husband for her.
"A husband," she mumbled. "What do you mean?" His eyes snapped knives. "What do you think I mean, Gertie? Bloody hell, have you always been so witless?"
She flinched. Not at his waspish tone, although there was that. No, she flinched at that dreaded name, Gertie. The Earl was the only one who called her Gertie, and she despised it. She had politely corrected him when they first began courting, but he had continued to use the moniker, and she had convinced herself that she could like it, that she should, that it was endearing. After their wedding, she soon accepted that she hated it. She had always hated it. She had accepted that truth as she accepted others about her new husband.
"Delia has a great many prospects," she repeated.
"It is much too soon for her to narrow her choices this early in the season."
"I will be the one to say when it is time to narrow her choices."
Her maid entered the room then, carrying a tray of fresh hors d'oeuvres. Abigail smiled and nodded to True as she passed her and stopped before the Earl. She executed a quick curtsy and proffered the tray.
"My lord?" "Ah."
He sat up and leaned forward, hovering a hand over the tray.
"These look delectable."
Even as he said the words, his gaze roamed the young maid, particularly the generous curves of her body tucked beneath her demure apron. True expelled a heavy sigh, hoping the sound would put a halt to his lewd perusal. Of course it did not. He lacked all shame. The maid was not unaware of the attention either. Her cheeks pinkened as she waited, her arms shaking as she held the tray extended toward him. Chatham selected a tiny crepe, laden with honey-drizzled duck, and popped it into his mouth.
Delicious. Your cook is a marvel. I really should visit more often if this is the fare I can expect."
True's stomach twisted and dipped. Good heavens, no. Perhaps plying him with excellent food and parading pretty servant girls before him was not the best decision. Not if it kept him around.
"You can leave the tray, Abigail.
Thank you," True said by way of dismissal. The girl made space for the tray on the table in front of Chatham, and then sent a relieved look True's way before hastily fleeing the room. Chatham watched her with a decided look of appreciation, angling his head to better view her as she departed.
"I do not recall her. Is she new?"
True deliberately ignored the question, not interested in fueling her husband's inappropriate interest in the young females on her staff. She had thus far spared the women in this house from his appetites. She hoped to continue that custom. Moistening her lips, she flexed her fingers over the knees of her gown.
"Might I have the name of the gentleman you have chosen?"
It was with great difficulty she conveyed those words. There was an inherent acceptance in them, and the last thing she felt was acceptance. She simply knew how to manage her husband. Direct opposition was never the way. She had to be more skillful than that. Subtlety and cunning were in order. He dragged his gaze back to her, blinking as though confused. The pretty maid and fresh canapes had clearly distracted him.
He'd already forgotten the thread of their conversation. "The name of this man you have, chosen," she prompted. "Oh, he is Jasper Thorne." She searched her memory. "I am not familiar with the gentleman." She thought she knew the names of all the eligible men in town. She had a daughter of marriageable age, after all. What manner of mamma would she be if she did not? "You would not be acquainted with him. He does not travel in our circles." "Then why would you recommend him? If this Thorne fellow did not move in their social strata, why would he even be a candidate in the Earl's mind?" Her husband was acutely conscious of his place among the hierarchy of the ton, of his very elevated place. In fact, he had time for no one who did not further his social ambitions and serve him in some manner. She would hazard to guess that Jasper Thorne was someone who could advance him socially. There could be no other explanation. The man was either rich or the next King of England. At Chatham's silence, she went on. "The young Lord Ruthford is quite enamoured of Delia, and she's known him all her life." His lip curled. "Ruthford? That little lordling is not what I had in mind." "There's not a mean streak in the lad's body, and he has always possessed a soft spot for Delia." There was great comfort in that. True knew he would never mistreat her. It was in his kind eyes. They softened when they looked at Delia. He worshipped her, and would be grateful to call her wife. He shook his head. "Ruthford's family possesses only moderate fortune. We can do much better than that. Thorne is a man of great fortune, quite enough to go around." Chatham's eyes gleamed, much in the manner they had when he had admired young Abigail. "Delia would be quite comfortable as the future Viscountess Ruthford." "Delia's comfort is of no concern." Of course it was not. She was merely a daughter, a female, little better than chattel. No matter the class, no matter the rank, women were pawns to be manoeuvred on the chessboard of life. The players, as always, were men. Chatham went on. "I've only one daughter, thanks to you, and I intend to get the most I can out of her. With only one son, what choice do I have?" True ignored the pointed jab. She was well aware he blamed her for what he considered too few offspring. "Please, Chatham, I have never even met this Thorne fellow. More importantly, Delia has never met him." The Earl shrugged. "A matter soon to be rectified." Her mind desperately sought something, grasping for anything that might affect Chatham and sway him from this course. "I thought for certain you would want someone titled for Delia." He gave yet another shrug. "A title means naught if a man lacks the funds to support it." This she knew he had learned firsthand. It was what led him to marrying her, for her fortune, and now it led him to this, to selecting a suitor for his daughter based not on pedigree or character or love, but solely on how deep a prospective suitor's pockets ran. She watched him as he continued to eat, helplessness welling up within her. "Ruthford can comfortably support her. He's not a spendthrift. He spends no time at the hells or on women. He is very sensible. Unlike you." His gaze sharpened on her, as though he heard her inner thoughts. "Put Ruthford from your mind. He's not good enough." Not good enough for Chatham, because he can't or won't support his father-in-law in addition to his wife. Indeed not. Ruthford's parents would not permit that. "And this Mr. Thorne is?" "Fret not. You will meet him soon. I've made the arrangements." "Soon? How soon?" She stared at him expectantly, her chest tightening with dismay as she waited for him to elaborate. He continued to eat idly, prompting her to demand, "Arrangements?" "The Lindley ball is tomorrow night. He will be there. I've made certain of that myself, securing him an invitation. I expect Cordelia to be most accommodating. Be certain to school her on her manners and what is expected of her. She should be most pleasing to him. She will not be the only young lady there intent on landing him." He frowned in silent contemplation of that. "Do you think you are capable of handling this matter to my satisfaction, wife?" Clearly he had his doubts.
She had her doubts too. Her thoughts whirled. Of course they'd planned to attend the Lindley ball. They never missed one of Lady Lindley's fetes. Now the Earl stared at her expectantly, awaiting her response. She will be polite, she promised, because no other answer would be accepted. I will make certain. Not that True need do anything particularly special to fulfill that promise. Delia was exceedingly well-mannered, a gentle soul, almost too kind for this world, and that worried True as she knew just how unkind this world could be to the gentle ones. Debutantes could be cutthroat creatures, and Delia had a target on her back as one of the loveliest debutantes of the season. I expect her to be more than polite. The Earl's gaze fixed on True again, and there was a decided amount of threat in the look. See that it is so, wife. Perhaps have someone else school her, as this may not be your particular expertise. I can recommend a few ladies. Your friend, the Duchess of Dedham. Oh, he snapped his fingers. Or the delectable Marchioness of Sutton. A faraway, lustful expression came over his face as he clearly envisioned Hazel, more than likely without her clothes. Now that is a woman who knows how to effectively use her wiles. I regret not having her when I could have. He was a pig. True could only sit in her chair, feeling impossibly small and helpless and full of impotent rage as her husband waxed on about another lady's charms, one of her friends no less. And yet, even as she sat so very still, a fiery ball of determination burned in the pit of her stomach. Her daughter would have better than this. Her husband would not win. True might forever be stuck, a prisoner of her husband's will, subject to his whims, but she would not sentence Delia to such a fate. She would fight. She would fight for Delia. She would fight for her as she had never fought for herself. Perhaps for the first time in her life, True would fight, and she would bloody well win.